This was supposed to be the video where I take this car out for a drive, but it's just too many things stacked up against me. Found a lot of problems with this car. I can't get this plug out right here. I actually broke a hex key off in it and it's stuck, it's frozen, I can't get it off. So probably gonna have to take the tank out. Got one of the bolts out, but these socket head cap screws are just loaded with years of debris. So I'm dental picking and hammering in some Allen keys, but I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to get these rear ones out. They're, I think, stripped already. I felt a little bit of movement on this one, so that's good sign. All right, that's 2 out of 3. Now I just got to get that near one. Oh, that one's tough. There we go. I ended up taking this little carbide burr and shaping some new grooves in the hex pattern, and then I just hammered a larger hex key in there and was able to just break it loose with, I think it was an American size, I'm not sure, maybe like 9/32 or something. So I got it out. I was planning on welding to the top, but I didn't need to resort to that. That's why I cleaned off the top of the bolt. I didn't want to take the fuel tank out, but this is the piece I couldn't remove. This is the drain plug, it's loose. I got the fuel inlet out, and then this is going to be the return line. Normally this is capped off in the 912, but I couldn't undo it from under the car. And you can see there's a broken hex in there that I couldn't get it out. So now I'm going to try to get it out here on the bench. Should be a little easier with better access. Working on old cars is not always easy, and this is exactly why. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than you would think to connect a fuel system. This is just a good example, but it has to get done. Okay, that gets the broken hex out, and now I can put in a regular hex and hopefully break it loose. There we go. The factory plug here is undamaged. The reason why I think the first hex key broke off is because it wasn't actually a hex key. Because the proximity was so close to the cross member and the steering rack, I couldn't get a hex key in there, so I used a bolt with some nuts welded onto it, and it's a 10 millimeter, across the flats bolt, and that's what I was wrenching on, and it actually broke the bolt, not the hex keys. I got this new fitting from McMaster Car, and the thought was to just drill and tap this for an elbow. That'll allow me to get the return fuel in. I always use a pilot drill just to make sure the hole stays in the center. Now I'm using brass fittings here. If that bothers you, then you can get steel, metric fittings. I think even with ethanol fuels, it'll take a long time for this to degrade. So this is what I'm gonna use. And this is what's commonly available. So you kind of have to pick and choose your battles. I'm gonna leave it like that and then orient it in the car in the right position. Before I put the fuel tank in, I'm gonna try to fix the brakes. So I got the parts I need. This is a new rubber grommet. I think it was leaking either on this hose or on the rubber grommet because the fluid was just coming right out of the top of the master cylinder. I have better access with the tank out. Go put this in. And I found it easier to remove the master cylinder than try to push that in. I had to use some red rubber grease. That's the only way that I could get it to slip in. And then I have this tool, which is kind of like I guess a scraper tool. And I was able to push with this little clevis, just kind of push all around and get it to snap in. I gotta bleed the whole system anyways because the brakes were totally dry. I did clean the tank a little bit and I looked inside. It's not too rusty. The tank dropped in. I had to wrestle with that fitting. Might have been easier to put it in and then screw the fitting in, but because I had it torqued down, I just had to muscle it through. And then this is the original inlet filter, and it's plastic. It's like made of nylon or something, and it has a much smaller, I think this is an 8mm inlet, and this one is for a later car. It's a all brass construction, the nuts brass, and it has a 10mm inlet. So because of the Carrera engine and the fuel, restrictions going into the fuel pump, you don't want to have restrictions on the inside of the fuel pump or on the intake side of the fuel pump. So this is going to be the much better solution than this. One, because it's metal, and two, because it's bigger. I've hardwired this battery to the fuel pump just to check the pressure and also if there's any leaks. And back here in the engine bay, there's a big leak. So it's this return line that I'm sure it's coming out of the grommet there as it goes into the chassis. There's that grommet. There's fuel squirting out of there. So the hard line is somehow damaged because it's not this fuel clamp. I've replaced it with a few different ones, and that's not the issue. Usually I use these European ones, and I've had that on there, and then I put one of these on there, and it's still gushing out. All right, I just grabbed the fuel line out. This is the hard line that runs from the back of the tunnel. It goes up around the rear seat pans, and then it goes through the chassis out into the engine bay. So it's kind of placed in the car like this. And when I pulled it out from the chassis, it came out in two pieces. So there's a junction that is inside the chassis right here, and that just came apart. So if you look closely, my hands are really dirty, but this piece is rusted and it's just corroded from the inside and the outside. Super bad. Okay, I guess we're breaking out the tequila, get some bending done. I have this tubing left over from my car, and it is the exact same diameter. This is stainless tubing, and this is not. So this will last forever. Yeah, that's a pretty similar radius right there. And there's the new line coming through. The grommets in there too. A little hard to see there, but that's the stainless one. It's a little taller than the previous one, but I'd rather it be too long. That's it right there, pretty shiny. I don't have the rubber buffers on the clips, but that's where it goes. Kind of follows the frame pretty tight. I did hammer it a little bit to get it fit tighter, and then it needs a rubber clip right there, and then it goes in to the chassis right behind the shock there. Everything's connected now, so let's flip the switch. You can hear things going. Fuel's circulating even here in the injector rails. You get fuel flowing around, but it's not leaking. I can hear it moving now. This adapter part right here is gonna go away. I've ordered something to connect this right to the return side of the pressure regulator. The craziness continues on this car. I just ran into another problem. This is the throttle linkage bell crank. It's attached to the side of the transmission. When I was removing the engine, the 912 engine, I noticed this was really worn out, so I had got some new bushings for it. I just don't like putting together worn out stuff. But it was also bent, so when I pulled it off, it was the axle was sitting on an angle. And so I put this back on and I tried to bend it up to make it sort of, straight, and it just broke off. I ended up going through a bunch of hoops to get the old broken off piece out of the transmission, and this is it. I got it out. Had to use, my welder. Basically what I do is I weld a washer onto what's exposed of the stud, and then I welded a nut on the end of that. And took me 2 tries, but I was able to break it free. Looks like this throttle rod is too short. Okay, I extended this rod. I don't recommend this. I recommend getting a longer rod, the correct one. Reason being is this is strong enough. My only concern is that it's lumpy here, and if this was to somehow get caught on something in the engine or a hose gets drug up against it, this could cause you to have a stuck throttle. And so I think a smooth rod is better than this lengthened rod. So this is temporary. I will look for the correct rod for this. This rod is not much life left in it anyways. I don't know if you can tell, but the end of it is very thin. It's just worn. I don't know what was going on here, but I had to replace this too. Now, remember, this fuel pump is that's not the permanent mounting solution. I'm going to use a bracket that keeps it from drooping down and also doesn't put too much stress on the actual pump. I don't want the motor to lock up inside. There's different pressures in each of these lines. So this is the high pressure line that comes off the fuel pump. This one is a low pressure line. Actually, it's negative pressure because that's the suction line. This is the one that routes up and goes into the tank where it has that brass inlet. That's low pressure. And then the return line, which comes from here, goes up over the steering rack. That one comes into this fitting. And that stuff has hose clamps or spring clamps on it. It's also low pressure. All the pressure it has is whatever weight of fuel is in the tank, because the tank is vented to atmosphere. So it's atmospheric pressure plus a little bit of pressure due to the weight of the fuel in the tank. So there's fittings that are appropriate for each of the pressure. These are the high pressure ones. That's the one that's important. Brand new line all the way through the tunnel. Also keep in mind there is a skid plate that covers all of this. So anytime you run over a tumbleweed or a cone or whatever, it's not going to be able to grab these lines and rip them off. So all this will be protected. Okay, first start, here we go. Lower it down. Zach and I just finished bleeding the brakes. So if there's no leaks, I suppose we could take it for a ride. Okay, it's out of gear. think there's a little bit of fuel left in it from before. There we go. I don't have my gas pedal connected, but I just want to make sure we don't have any major leaks back here. Okay, we'll try again, this time with the gas pedal. Yeah, it's not really happy because it doesn't sound as good as it does on the engine stand. So let's do some more troubleshooting. Yeah, I don't see anything majorly wrong with the connections. I think the issue is there's only like a gallon of gas in the tank. And because the supply and the return are so close, it could be that we're picking up air bubbles and it's just stumbling a little. So I'm gonna put some more gas in it. I mean, that can't hurt, right?
I know what's wrong with it. Ain't got no gas in it.
Oh, these gas cans are ridiculous. Looks like I got an oil line leak as well. Looks like the line closest to me that goes to the oil cooler, looks like that's leaking. Yeah, it's definitely leaking oil too. So we can't take it for a ride with leaking oil like that. So probably gonna have to investigate that. I know I tightened that pretty tight, so I'm not gonna just over tighten it. It's probably best to go in and see if there's any damage to the threads or if there's anything stuck in there. I'm not sure what that could be, but because it's steel on aluminum, if you just over crank it, you're probably gonna mess it up. So best to stop here and continue on another day. Okay, everything I've touched on this car has kind of gone wrong this week. So I didn't tell you, but the brake on the left rear is out. It's not, doesn't have any fluid flow. Zach came out and helped me bleed all the brakes. The brake bleeders were kind of frozen, but I was able to break them free. But there's no fluid flow on the left rear. I don't know if the caliper's frozen. It's most likely a swollen brake line that's just constricted. It's not flowing at all. So we do have brake pedal, but it's kind of a little bit spongy. I'm sure there's air somewhere on that side. The fuse box had lots of blown fuses. Wires are sort of left hanging under the dash there. So had those broken bolts on the transaxle and also in the fuel tank. It just keeps adding up. So unfortunately, we couldn't take it for a ride today. I put in, pretty much 2 solid days on this car and still can't drive it. But it's the way it goes. This car has been sitting for so long. That really takes a toll on a car. You got to keep driving them. I should say you got to keep driving them and maintain them.